It starts about 6 p.m. in the afternoon. For me, pretty great, pretty chill. For 3 to 4 hours, up until like, I think 12, I was awake with Vivid, just hitting artillery, pulling back. Spain was pushing aggressively. He actually cut south, which put a big dent into the defenses. "16 minutes after 0 hour. Units on both sides moved to their fighting positions as the first shots are exchanged between Yugoslavian artillery and unknown armor contacts. In the photo, you can see 2 naval contacts and an Italian gunship going for an attack run. Shortly after, an unknown infantry contact started moving towards the northern outpost. It turned out to be a single motorized infantry battalion. The threat was dealt with an artillery volley quickly, but the garrison of the northern outpost took minor damage from enemy artillery. Meanwhile, on the Mediterranean Sea, things are heating up. The 2 stacks of naval surface fleets consist of 8 cruisers and 1 naval officer. And they had spotted an enemy naval contact. Then 2. Then 3. The lead ship goes in for an attack run. It was a French naval officer stack, then pulled back. And the 4 cruisers go for an attack run, then pull back. This is a classic hit and run here. The enemy are either not online or too slow to fire back. We killed 1 destroyer. That's 1 kill, 1 hour into the game. As our ships pull back over the curve, the Spanish officer stack pulled up and fired his volley, killing 1 of our cruisers. On the Adriatic Sea, things are heating up as well. Spanish naval contact started a bombardment of the Yugoslavian coastline. It dealt minor damage, so it's probably a destroyer or frigate. It is rather interesting that the opponents have quite a number of naval ships inside the Adriatic Sea with at least 2 naval contacts. The Adriatic Sea is completely shallow water, which is unfavorable for ships, and it also has 1 tile for movement, so any ship there can be easily encircled. For now, we do not know if it's a loose trigger finger for the Spanish Navy or a battlefield shaping operation in progress. But, either way, their 50-kilometer naval guns are disadvantaged to our 75-kilometer artillery, though they are targets which will force our guns off the front lines. The quiet African front now has some action. A Tunisian heli gunship flying to hit our anti-air and artillery. Needless to say, it was knocked out as soon as it found out who it was looking for this entire time. The enemy doubled down on their love for gunships in the Yugoslavian coastline. Adding to the damage of the Spanish ship, the heli does its attack, run, and return. Our fighters weren't online to react to this attack, and it flew away back to its base. A single Spanish National Guard battalion popped up on the Libyan coast, which is defended by 12 motorized infantry, 2 National Guard battalions, and 1 gunship. The gunship goes for an attack run. The landing National Guard didn't die, and rather wisely decided to turn back to the sea. 1 hour, 7 minutes after war, the enemy's first ground troops pass through the border. It is rather fitting with the other moves so far, is 1 National Guard. At this stage of the battle, that unit is already food. 4 Portuguese fighters show up on the Libyan capital, either scouting for targets or attempting to suppress our air mobility. It then moved on to patrol over the southern airfield. It now seems like he's just scouting for information in the middle of our anti-air defenses. However, what took him down wasn't a SAM missile, or even an anti-air shell, but a helicopter. Turkey sent his gunship into the sky, which he gladly attacked and went back to refuel. While on his way home, his fighters were destroyed by Egyptian fighters, killing 4 fighters in exchange of 1 fighter of our own and 1 gunship. Meanwhile, the French player seems to have woken up and started bombarding the European front units with his ships. Rather oddly, he splitted his ships and attacked individually, in what can be called a flower formation ripped from 1914. Back on the Mediterranean, and the wildest anime arc is about to unveil before your eyes. The Turkish ships, which is moving again for another hand-run attack after his guns had been stocked with fresh shells after the last attack, had picked up a naval contact. On the curve. Last time, the enemy have already caught and fired upon our ships on Process Curve, and seeing an enemy here isn't the best of news. Luckily, the enemy naval contacts decided to retreat westward and grouping up with other ships. We went for our attack run and pulled back. The enemy wasn't fast enough to fire back while we were attacking. As our ships are retreating through the curve, the enemy officer stack caught and fired upon us, losing an unholy 2 cruisers. Due to our ships being stacked too close together. It isn't the best of news, but we can, at least, retreat to fight again. All hope of an escape are thrown into the trash the moment a naval contact arrived behind us, in the middle of our guns being reloaded. This is extremely bad. There are 2 escape routes, one northward and one southward. Both are unfavorable for a ragged fleet, but we throw the dice and decided to go for the southern path, the entire time rushing all our ships. If we were fast enough, we might be able to escape. Maybe that wasn't an officer stack and we haven't went into his radar range, so he doesn't know our location. We send a single fighter out to fulfill the task of a mini AWACS to scout enemy naval ship. It's obviously not as good, but it's all we can afford. Lo and behold, the scary fleet destroying naval stack of unimaginable scale was a single National Guard transport. This entire time, we have been running from a National Guard unit, and for the entire process, rushing and wasting health of our ships. After identifying the target, we move up and with a hint of bitterness sink that bloody convoy. While all of these shenanigans were happening, the many AWACS have gotten contact of the enemy officer heading for a fight, and if he's looking for a fight, we'll give him a fight. On a clearer spotting run, we can see the unit composition of the officer stack with a level 2 naval officer and 4 level 1 cruisers. Unfortunately, our fighter lingered a bit too long in enemy anti-air range and got some holes ripped in their seat. It was minor damage, but enough for the fighter to decide to return to base. With all the new information and the bitter feeling of being trolled by National Guard, we move our ships into battle formation for meeting engagement with the enemy ship. Rather oddly, the enemy starts to fall back, but with even more rushing, we caught up and landed a shot. In response to that, the opponent started chasing us. He chased for so long that we were running into the corner where there are no longer any deep water. Then, after we stopped rushing for a moment for other reasons, he issued an attack order on the ship. Then nothing? We thought we would lose another cruiser. With a closer look, we realized his gun wasn't loaded. It seems that he also just realized that his gun was loaded as soon as he fell back. We too fall back for our guns to reload as well. Moving away from that anime art, we take a look at the Adriatic Sea. In the middle of the fighting, the opponents have dropped an eye-watering amount of new naval contacts on the water. Since we have agreed not to spend gold in this game, the only logical answer is that they're all transports. But where on earth would these transports go from the Adriatic Sea instead of being on land? At the end of the day, the average infantry soldier don't normally go attack warships. That question would soon be answered as the first of those contacts started disembarking on the Yugoslavian coastline. Now, all those random shore bombardments from those out-of-place ships line up with the shaping operation for a good landing. The first one to lead the charge was an infantry officer with some motorized infantry. Luckily, our beach defense force wasn't just 2 infantry, as we had 2 artillery stacks and a handful of gunships for defense. It isn't perfect, but it'll have to do. Then, the opponent added more pressure on the Yugoslavian front, with Italy infantry rolling past the border and threw themselves on our outpost with the aid of their artillery. As a result of this, one of our artillery stacks was trapped and is forced to melee and retreat out of the fight, losing 2 anti-air vehicles. With the result of hours of bombardment from the ships adding up, we lost one of our infantry and decided to retreat our infantry and hope to form a second defense line deeper inland. Our artillery did wipe out a decent chunk of the enemy landing force, however. Adding to the situation to make it even worse is the armored contact moving from the Italian border into our stressed, thin southern garrison. The south garrison being attacked by Italian infantry and relentless artillery bombardment is now on the verge of being overrun. To make the news even worse, the armored stack turned out to be a tank officer and the melee role. Yeah! Now, this is rather actually interesting, as all of our opponent's decisions so far, as the tank officer gives attack bonus to any armored unit in combat. This includes the mobile artillery, which both teams have been using. So, using the tank officer in the melee role is rather creative. But the 1 infantry couldn't take on 11 infantry, 4 tank destroyers, 1 tank officer, and 2 mobile anti-air vehicles. Soon gave way to the enemy and was overran. This now left us with a gap in the front line. Our plan B? Yeah, now is to use our artillery and give land to wear the opponent melee troops down before forcing them out with the aid of the road, which we have built before war. Yes, the creation of the road. After the fall of the southern outpost, the enemy's units are now pouring into our open world. Our hope is to stall them with melee units and bomb them from afar with our speedy artillery. Seeing that the opponent only has melee units and center lines, as long as we hold them off 5 kilometers from artillery, the enemy cannot and will not deal damage to our guns, and after enough degradation, the opponent will be forced to fall back. This, of course, also comes with the sacrifice of land, but this is a small cost. By the end of the day, it is a unit designed to kill the units, not cities. During that time, artillery took out the infantry that was disembarking on shore, and the infantry officer came with it. This now frees up artillery to help deal with the tank officer up north. And according to plan, we feed the tank officer infantry, slowing him down. And we keep on bombarding him with our big guns. Scary. And what air power we have after the naval landing. After suffering losses, the tank officer is now reduced to 1 tank destroyer and 1 infantry by him. Then soon reduced to 1 very badly damaged tank destroyer. And the officer soon takes the flight. From the start, the large number of melee units were questionable, with artillery normally being the dominant unit on the Alliance versus Alliance battlefield, with its residential damage without taking in as a huge strong point. Adding more to it, the opponent attempted a naval landing on the Yugoslavian coast. Let's love that. They used a unit that cannot fire or fight back when they're disembarking for hours. Hours which move very fast in these alliance matches. Meanwhile, there had been a lot of movement in the African front. Zooming in, we can see some hit-and-run fights did happen, but without much resistance from the opponent artillery with radar, anti-air, and air superiority fighter support available. We're about to capture a Tunisian city and run into 6 National Guards defending it. This will hold the city for now, but for very long. Not all is well, however. Down South Egypt sent most of his infantry and radar into an attack, and it ran into some outposts. And the Egyptian player is offline, to call back this attack. Overall, after beating back the naval invasion in Yugoslavia, and routing the tank officer in Europe, and making gains in Africa despite some unnecessary losses, the tides seem to be turning in our favor. Even on the sea, things are turning. Our fleet takes a northern route. We run into opponents' naval patrol aircraft and some ships, with our ships pushing past the island of Sicily. As the dust of battle settles, we find ourselves in a position to launch a counterattack. It is only wise to strike our weakened opponents while they are down. They have been worn down in the previous fights and will need time to regroup before they can regain their footing. It is essential for us to maintain our advantage and apply pressure to keep them on their toes, all the while targeting their rear area units such as artillery and anti-air. During this counterattack, another element of the enemy was revealed. The tank officer, who was previously expected to be stationed on artillery, appears again, accompanied by the tank destroyer from the previous confrontation. Now, it is abundantly clear that the enemy intends to slow our advance down by any means necessary, even to the point of sending the most valuable officers into melee combat. The simple act of deploying a tank officer destined for artillery duty to engage in close quarters combat, and to do so repeatedly with a certain death each time, speaks volumes about the opponent's desperation. As our columns of steel and men crossed the Italian Alps, protected by our anti-air coverage, radar, and air superiority fighters, we made headway into Italian territory. The other team throws all they have left at us to take Venice. In alliance versus alliances, Italy has a claim to a defensive paradise, a Vietnam of sorts. The terrain is divided by a long river and many mountains to hinder enemy movements. But a fortress is nothing without troops, and as our armored columns plowed through the Italian countryside, the terrain failed to impede our progress. As our naval fleet continued to make progress, our radar detected a naval contact. The encounter soon revealed itself to be a Spanish naval officer, still recovering from a previous ill-fated encounter. Wise to not be deceived again, we held back some of our ships to act as a rear guard, guarding against any attempts at an envelopment, or at least providing us with a timely warning of such. In a surprising turn of events, after a brief bout of gunfire and maneuvering, both flagships moved their way back to reload. Slugging in the shallow water, the Spanish naval officer took a sudden turn to the east, straight into our side of the water. We applied pressure on the foe, turning our ships to attempt an encirclement and to trap the Spanish fleet. As the Spanish fleet continued to sail east, it could be a result of the heat of the battle, a forced decision, or even a trap laid out by the opponent. With no turning back now, the Turkish naval staff continued to pursue them in shallow water. Meanwhile, our rear guard shadowed the fleet in the deep water, and the reserve sailed up to close the exit from the Strait of Messina. With this tactical strategy, the Turkish Navy had caught their opponents in a vulnerable situation and was ready to strike. Meanwhile, on the African front, the Algerian fixed-wing officer appeared in the sky. The Air Force, which had been cause for concern since the beginning of the war, had finally shown up 19 hours into the conflict. Leading the fray with him were 4 air superiority fighters, which contested the territory of Egyptian fighters, despite the fact that flying into the airspace is typically avoided due to the threat of enemy SAMs, mobile anti-air Egyptian fighters. The Algerian officer boldly approached and was shot down by SAMs, mobile anti-air, and the Egyptian fighters, resulting in the loss of 4 of his planes and serious injuries to himself. Not long after, the African front partakes in another counterattack, but with their force suffering losses, this is just some last-ditch effort to hold on to the game. The attack is defeated afterwards. Meanwhile, on the sea, we push in and deal with what naval ships they have left in France. Generally speaking, the match has been won with a decisive victory on all 3 fronts, and soon after, the match did end. Looking back, it was a hard fight, and we did make some mistakes, but in the end, we carried well. We'd like to thank Bulls on Parade for a good fight and the players for participating.